Welcome to the Power of Pleasure podcast. I'm your host, L'Oreal, and I'm on a mission to help you embrace pleasure as a lifestyle. This show is a love letter to all the pleasure life has to offer. And each week, I'll be chatting with friends, loved ones, peers, and people I admire about all things pleasure. Through these conversations, I'm giving you the best tools, resources, and tips to help you create a life that is ooey gooey juicy good, one shift at a time. So buckle up and let's get ready for this week's episode. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, beautiful people. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Power of Pleasure podcast. I'm your host, L'Oreal, and today we are having another really good conversation about finances. But this conversation is about preparing for retirement. And, as a younger millennial, it makes me so nervous to think about retirement just because I know that the options that maybe my mom had are not the same options, that I have now. So I definitely have to look at retiring through a different lens. But our guest is someone who has already managed to retire by the age of 50, and she is really passionate about helping other people do the same thing. So please help me welcome our guest, Miss Dalene. Hello.
Hello. Thank you. I'm excited.
Wonderful. So I always ask before we get into the interview for you to just take a moment to let the people know more about you and what it is that you do.
Yeah. So, you got it right. I retired at the age of 50. And I did have a pension plan. That doesn't make it any easier. There's still some steps you have to take. However, I wanted to have that option. So I created the door to be opened when I was ready. I could have gone as early as 48. But I chose to hang on for 2 more years and then left at 50. And as I was getting ready to, I was like, what am I going to do? And so as I was sitting with my hobbies and the things I love to do and what I'm passionate about, I really realized I wanted to become an entrepreneur, number one, so that I wasn't doing the 9-to-5 anymore. I had done that for 32 years. And so I stepped into, that's when I found financial coaching and I stepped into it. And as my time working through it, I realized the need for not only managing finances, but to creating that desire to retire. It's more than just money. That's my motto. Financial planners are so focused on growing your money and helping you get there. And then when you get there, and I'm sure you've heard, people are like, I'm so bored. I don't know what to do. I have no purpose in life. Mm-hmm. And that's where I come in. That's where I come in because I have done it. I've lived it. I've enjoyed it. There's so many different options and avenues. We just have to think about it. We have to plan for it and prepare for it. I had my dream early, which I think helped create with the motivation, the consistency to get there at the age of 50. And so, I just hope to support others in creating their retirement dream and their motivation to get there.
And yes, I've heard that a lot. My mom retired, I want to say it's been maybe 3 or 4 years now, and she is bored. She's oh my gosh, I think I'm just going to go and get like a job as a greeter at Walmart so I have something to do. And I'm like, what? You worked for, I want to say my mom worked for like 35, 36 years, and then she retired. And I'm like, you want to go back to work? Like, I don't think that's kind of the point of retirement, or maybe I'm not understanding. So I'm really glad that we have been able to connect because, like you said, a lot of financial planners, it's all about growing your money and, getting into stocks or other things to do to make more money. They don't really talk about what it means to retire, preparing yourself for that outside of finances. Like, yes, finances play a big part, but I'm sure there's some other steps that are missing. And it sounds like the work that you're doing is helping to fill in the gaps.
Yes. Like having them think, like if I were working with your mom prior to it, okay, start thinking about it. And there's more than just getting another job, right? There's, you can go and work with communities, work with schools, work with, all sorts of things. If you want to get involved in different places, make a difference. I became an entrepreneur. There's always that journey. So yeah, it's just exploring it. My husband retired 3 years before me, and he does choose to go back to work. However, he works a very part-time, and he's very selective on where he works. So he's been able to do a lot of jobs he never could explore before, just for fun, just for growth, just for learning. So he just does his in a different way. So I always love to share, he was a Zamboni driver, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, how fun, how exciting. And they pay horrible wage for that job, but it was something he could do because we didn't need that living wage anymore. It just becomes extra. And so, yeah, there's lots of different things to think about on the flip side.
Absolutely, I'm sure. And so, what would you say led you to want to retire by the age of 50? And what was the turning point that had you go from maybe I can do this to, okay, no, I know I can do it. This is possible for me.
Yeah, so I worked for government. And so with the government, I had the pension. My dad had retired on the pension as well. So I was really just modeling myself after him. Just going through the, day to day working, do what you do. You put towards your 401 as well, all of those things. And I changed from one agency to another. And I'm like, okay, I did 17 there. I can do another, oh crap, I only have 13 years. That was the qualifying years to be able to retire. And I'm like, oh man, I got to get ready. So it was that moment I realized I've got to be prepared, because 13 years is not that long. Mm-mm. And so I wanted to have that door open. I didn't know if I would leave. And like I said, I did 2 more years. So it was another 15, but I wanted to have that door open because I had experienced as a worker, those older people, and I'm not being rude, who are kind of the cog in the wheel. Like they have no desire to go anywhere else, and they're kind of plugging up those promotion availabilities to all of the other news, and I'm like, there's got to be a flow here. And I wanted to go out on top instead of like failing, aging, all of that. And so those were my desires. Those were my reasons. And so I got to work, and my daughter was still young. She was 8. So I'm like, well, I still got to raise her. She's still got a lot of things to do. We still got to have fun as a family. But I got to prepare for retirement. So those were my 2 focuses. And I just basically put my money in both places and just kept going and just kept going.
Good. I really like that. And 13 years, it does go by fast, especially when you have children. That time just really, it flies by really quickly. And I assume it's easy to just get so wrapped up in the day-to-day that you're not really focusing on what's going to come, when your kids are older, when it's actually time for you to retire. And so when you think about how people traditionally learn about retirement, what are some misconceptions that you think people have about retirement planning or, financial freedom? And what do you do when you're working with your clients to help address those things?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception is people think they have to be a certain age. Well, I've got to be old enough to get Social Security, and I've got to be old enough to get Medicare. Mm-hmm. You don't. You have to plan in the right way to be able to not rely on that. So I think that's a huge misconception, that people are just working, and they're like, well, when I'm 65, then I'll go. And that's what, it's Social Security, Medicare is going to take care of me. And the second thing with the Medicare is not free. And I think a lot of people think they're just going to roll over into this Medicare and it's going to continue on with healthcare, just like they've been getting from their employer. And it's not, and so really start learning more about what that is. You do have to pay a monthly premium. It's based off how much you earn. And so you've got to explore that and be prepared. And so, do you want to get to that point of like, I'm just waiting until that age? And we know, like, health wise, the difference between a 60 and 70 is extreme, and it depends on who you are. But what if all of a sudden you're found like at 60 as opposed to waiting until 65, like health wise, other circumstances, and you're finding yourself being forced to retire? And it's like, why not plan for an earlier one and then just go with the motions after? So I think people need to understand all of the elements that play into it and build their own wealth letting Social Security fill in a gap, maybe that comes to support as they're aging and healthcare does get more expensive, it can cover that, and just understanding what Medicare is going to provide or not provide. I pay less for a double medical premium than my mother did from Medicare.
Wow.
And, so it's like just understanding that it's not going to just be a free ride and that it is going to take some. And I'm out on the open market, most entrepreneurs are, and there's a cost out there. Just plan on taking that cost with you. As, a government employee, I didn't pay any premiums. And I know a lot of employers don't make their employees pay a premium, but you know what? It's going to come to you.
Got it. And thank you for that. The insurance thing has been really big. I remember my mom, as she got closer to retirement, trying to share this information with me, but I had no idea what she was talking about, because I was in high school when she first started having these conversations, and I'm like, yeah, okay, but I didn't know what she was talking about. But now that I'm an adult, and I'm married and I have children and I'm working, I'm seeing a lot of the things that you have mentioned, not only with the insurance, but when you're working with the company, you have a good job and you want to move ahead. Sometimes there's nowhere for you to go because you have people who've been with the company 20 years, 25, 30 plus years. They're not leaving. And so on that note, especially as women, sometimes the idea of being able to achieve financial independence, it can be really daunting, especially when you're starting to feel a little stifled in your career, but you really want to plan for the future. And so what advice would you be able to give to someone who may find themselves in a situation like that and they're not sure where to start?
Yeah, I can totally, relate to that. I started with the government. I found myself, quote, unemployed. I was still living at home. I was unemployed for 3 weeks. So it was just a term for that time. It's way different than having a family and all of that. However, that's how I ended up working for the government. And it was a really good job, but I put myself through school. And so as I was I got my accounting degree. My job was not in accounting, but I was making good money, and I had, vested myself in this pension plan and these services. And I'm like, what am I going to do? I could have gone to the private market and become an accountant, CPA, and made a lot more money, but I would have had to sock the extra away to be able to retire. So I just kind of stayed there, So as I was working through it, I was like trying to find places to go that would use my degree. I earned my degree. I wanted to be doing it. My employer was so good at trying to find something that fit, and they used my talents in different areas. So I was very glad of that support. I did I call it a 4-year hiatus, went to the actual finance department, and I hated it. 32 years minus those 4, I worked in law enforcement. I did all types of support personnel. I was not a dispatcher. I did all of the others. And so it just has a different pace, a different environment. And I love that, being 18 and growing up in that, and so I went back. And then when I moved agencies, I actually moved into a position with the sheriff's department that needed an accounting degree. It was a budget manager, finance manager. I was actually teaching cops how to budget. And so I was so grateful to finally be, quote, earning and using my degree. So I understand that. So if you are somebody, you're feeling stifled, nobody's movement, there's no shifting, and there might be a reason you're loving to stay, see if you can find complementary other employers, right? Not that you really want to leave, but see if you can find something that's similar that might have that next step up. I think it's really empowering. And I always loved a good challenge. I loved to be challenged in my job. I think that was another reason I retired. I could have gone 3 more years, was my job was just so easy by that point, So it's like, give me something new, give me something challenging. So go explore in a complementary employer and see if you can't maybe step laterally to another employer or even up and get that promotion and find yourself, stepping above those people who are kind of stuck in the wheel. Because I didn't want to be that. So I understand that. And it's it's great to be able to add to that movement and the continuation for women to be able to improve and get promoted. And so sometimes you got to go outside of your box, but don't go too far. Don't go too far, because I think that's important as well.
That is really, really good. Because it's those are conversations that have been coming up a lot, especially, in the year you got performance reviews and all that coming up. And so I feel like this is really timely as we're getting into the new year. We're in the first quarter of, 2025 at the time of this recording. And so a lot of people are trying to figure things out as far as, do they stay with their job? Do they find something else? And I think it's really important, to not just encourage people to be so quick to jump ship, but try to find ways where they can still keep what they have going and just move to a different area within the company, because you never know where those doors are going to open. And as it relates to like making those lateral moves within a company, it sounds like that's one of the strategies that you use to help prepare yourself for early retirement, in addition to educating yourself about some different things. But what specifically, I guess, if you had 2 or 3 strategies that you could share with the listeners, what would those strategies be?
Okay, so on the financial piece of it, and this will be for anybody, any age, if you are working for an employer and they have a match, you take that match. Full 100%, no questions asked. You've got to do that. And I know with inflation, it can be tight, but if you can make that happen sooner than later. So say there's a 4% match or a 5% match, and you're like, well, I've got 2 in there, go another percent. 1% is not a lot. And you might not see it, and just increase it by 1%, see what happens. If you still feel like, yeah, that wasn't a big deal, then do another percent, but take that full match, because you're actually getting 2 for 1. And so you're getting that free money. I had that in my last 15 years. My husband did not. He had stayed at the agency where I was, and it makes a world of difference. It was, so not only my promotion, but a world of difference for the total amount of savings was like 2/3 higher than what he was getting just because of that. So that's one strategy. Go do that. Don't worry so much about, well, should it be a Roth or should it be a traditional? Just save. Just save. And then the next thing that is a strategy that's not really financially, but as you're approaching retirement, I want you to start thinking about, we just, you did mention we're just into 2025. So we've just kind of finished our holidays. We had some great times, right? And if you're a worker, you probably stayed home more. There was probably some great mornings, waking up slow, the people that were with you, the things that you did, that is your wealth. That is your wealth. So think about that. That is what you want in retirement. How can you get that in retirement? How can you make that happen? How did that work? So I always like to have people go to that, but then I always love to, and this sounds really bad, but what are you going to do every single day? Because that's what retirement does boil down to. Even if you are going to go travel, even if you are going to go be a golfer, those are the two things that's what you do when you retire, and I don't do either. But it boils down to, what are you going to do every day? Even traveling, even golfing only fills so many days. So, I love my slow mornings. I still wake up at the same time. I still wake up between 5 and 6, but I don't even start really doing anything or moving until like 8. And then by 2:30, I'm like, well, that's the end of my day. And so you kind of got this shift, but still there's about 6 hours in a day. There's going to be preparation of food. There's going to be cleaning of the house. There's going to be running errands, those types of things. But still, it's going to boil down to, what are you going to do every day? Maybe you've got a hobby. Maybe there's a new skill you want to learn. Maybe you want to go back to school, right? Just let it be open and don't let it have any boundaries, and just start thinking about what you can be and who you can be in this next phase.
I love that. And that's actually one of the questions that I was going to ask you. So that's a perfect segue. And I love when the conversations just align themselves like that. And so one of my questions is, what hobbies or adventures or opportunities have you been able to take advantage of since retiring at 50?
Yeah. So I want to kind of go back to, what I was thinking before I decided to become an entrepreneur is
Mhm.
I'm an avid fiction reader. I read 100 to 150 books a year. It's
Wow.
what I do. It's what I do in my free time. People are like, well, do you watch TV? I'm like, no, no. I mean, very, 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 very little. So I was like, okay, am I going to read every day, all day long? No, right? Like that just can't be. I can read more. So that kind of took up some time there. And initially I was like, well, I'll go help children at school read. Well, that's when I realized I'd be on their timeline. I'm getting into a new idea though, kind of on that segue and really wanting to find, my husband and I just moved. So that's another thing we did on retirement, to be closer to our daughter who had moved 5 hours away. And so we've come here and done that. So learning new community, learning a new city. And I really want to start, exploring what their literacy programs are here, because I do believe that 100% that is the basis. Just like I believe saving is the basis of being really good with money, that reading is the way you can be really good with life, right? With growth and learning and being powered. But we've really just relocated and decluttered. I tell you what, moving from a home you lived in for 25 years, you have a lot of stuff. And when you don't want to pay movers or too many moving vans, you cut back and do all of that. But, I want to take up my crochet and my knit again. There's very few things I actually know how to make. And there's things that I really want to do. Like I knit dishcloths. I don't knit, but I knit dishcloths. And I really want to learn how to knit socks, and so it's like adding those and exploring those and making room for those. So there's just so much you can do. I think I'm ready to go outside and kind of garden and add flowers where I never had time working. It was never a desire that over empowered something else. We just kind of had very, very basics. I mean, we didn't have a trashy yard by any means, but, so yeah, it's just, hobbies can go a long way, especially new hobbies, but you've also got to have community and connection.
That is beautiful. And just thinking about, just taking a moment to picture what I would like for my slow morning to look like. And, if I had time off, like I didn't have to go to work, how would I want that to be? That feels really good. And I think that's a great exercise for people to do. And they can even start now, even if they're in their 30s, because when I was growing up, I don't know where this belief came from, but I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to be retired by 30. And now I'm like, okay, that's probably not going to happen, but it's still really good to think about. And I think, though, one of the things that keeps people from thinking too much about it, one, is just the hustle and bustle of everyday life, trying to get everything done. But I think, two, just as a society, we tend to focus so much on what we need to get done, and we don't really talk about, what we can do to enjoy life. And so what are some ways that you would recommend to people when it comes to balancing enjoying life now and then preparing for retirement and saving for the future?
Yeah. So I kind of led to what, mine was, where I still had my daughter growing up. She did a lot of extracurricular, but we also bought a piece of property so we could recreate on it, take four-wheelers there, spend some time there camping. So that was our now. And that's where I shuffled my money to, anything that supported that and helped us there, but also adding to my retirement at the same time. So you've got to define yours. So what is it that you want to do right now? Because I believe that is just as important as planning for the future. You've got people who are like, well, I'll never make it to retirement, so they don't even think about it. What if you do? I have a brother-in-law who thinks that, believes that, and he's there, and it's a struggle. It's going to be a struggle. And I get that, we don't think we're going to live until we're 65, or what is it going to even look like? But we have to respect our older self. But then we also need to respect what is happening now, especially if we do have kids, we do have a spouse. We've got to tend to what brings us together as a family, what we value as a family, and what that looks like. So, if that's going camping every weekend for you, or maybe it's traveling, twice a year, whatever that is, you've got to create that vision as well. And doing that with the hustle and the bustle, because there is, I did hustle. We were also my daughter's soccer coaches. So yes, I get it. You've got to kind of figure out what things can autopilot safely. I do believe in automation, but only if you've already tackled the foundations. Otherwise, sometimes automations ends up to overdrafts and into lots of credit cards. So be very careful with that. But coming out of your paycheck for retirement accounts, if you are working for an employer, have that happen. That's an automation that will go. And then just check in with that once a year. Can I up that? Do I need to up that? How is that feeling? How is that growing? And the other thing you should also do every year is check your beneficiaries. Because if, that demise would happen this year, you want that to be able to go to your family so that they're not struggling as much either and not able to get that. So really keep your vision for what it is you want now, whether you're single, married with kids. What is your vision for the right now? What brings the most enjoyment? What do you value as a family? And then what is it that you're going to want to do as you're older, and you can just have a very, I say vague, but a really, just a picture of what that could look like. You don't need to get into the specificities at such a young age, but it starts directing you. It starts getting you there.
I love that. And you touched on a lot of key points. And one that jumped out at me was, people having the belief that they're not going to make it to retirement age. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people just don't really talk about. And that, like you said, it's something that they don't think about until it happens. So what's one other thing, or maybe two other things that you wish people have more open discussions about when it comes to money and financial planning for retirement?
Yeah, don't be scared to talk about money. I know that is, it's such a hard subject for people to talk about money. I believe people will talk about sex before they will talk about money. With their coworkers, with their friends, right? I mean, money or sex, let's talk about sex. And I'm just like, why, And so be willing to talk about money. Talk about money with your spouse. Talk about money with your kids. That is so important. Talk about money with your coworkers. And it doesn't start off like this. How much do you make? That is not a healthy money discussion. A better discussion is, hey, who are you banking with? Because I'm looking for a new bank, right? That's an easy money discussion. Are you in a traditional? Are you in a Roth? Just asking these general questions about what somebody may be doing, or that you're considering something. Could they help you better understand? That's how we learn. That's how we grow. It's like when I was working, I had discussions with other coworkers, and they're like, did you know you could invest your HSA? And I'm like, what? And so they know things that you don't. Unless you have these money discussions, you're not going to know. And who wants to pore over textbooks about personal finance? Very, very, very few people, right? So getting these nuggets from individuals with your kids. I know some people, I was actually in a group training, and the individuals there, mostly women, were like, but I'm scared to talk to my kids because I don't have money. And that's the way I was grown up, it's like, we don't have the money. And I always felt like something was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about it neutrally. If your child asks for something, you either can buy it or not. And it's not because you don't have money. It's because you're prioritizing other things. And you've got to explain that to them. Because if you say we don't have money, they instantly wonder when they're going to be outside living on the streets, when they're going to not have food on their plate, when they're going to those basics. So you've got to really lean into that very neutral point of, well, we can't get that right now. How about we talk again in a couple of months? Keep that conversation open for them as well. They'll learn, like, it's not a priority. Oh, okay, we have to choose, and right there, you're setting that really good example that not everything can happen at the same time. So I was grateful for my parents. That's how we discussed money. And so I'm glad I can share that with others who were talked about in a very scarce type of way. going to work, showing your kids that going to work is where you get money is also healthy too. And I know there's like, I had the mom guilt, right? Leaving my kid at home. And she later told me, she goes, Mom, I thought everybody's mom worked. I didn't know any different. And she now goes to work every single day. So, just whatever you do with the money, very, very neutral with your kids.
That is so good. And it's another perfect segue into my next question. So you mentioned that, how to talk about things neutrally, because it's not that you don't have money, right? Like everyone has had some sort of financial struggle, depending on who you ask. I feel like it's relative, right? Because what's expensive to one person may just be a drop in the bucket for somebody else. So it's all relative. But when you are dealing with clients who maybe they want to retire early and they're ready to start planning, but they feel trapped by debt, or maybe they feel like they have too many obligations and they just don't see where the money is going to come from, what advice do you have for those people?
Yeah. So the way I construct a budget is very simply, I do 3 buckets. So we have bills, we have spending, and then what's left over is actually savings. And there's a method to creating that savings from stability to independence. And that savings will pay off debt. That savings will grow your retirement. That savings is for a lot of different things. And so then working with those individuals and helping them see like what they do have left over at this point, building the stability, because number one, most people are not planning for their non-recurring expenses, like their car registration, which is due once a year, Christmas, right? Most people are like, oh, Christmas is here. Yeah, you knew that January 1st, it's going to happen December 25th. So failing to plan is your own emergency. But, those are the things that are getting people into struggles and adding to that debt. And so instantly, showing them a better way that slows that down, but it also builds up the savings that they can use to pay off debt. And heading into retirement, they can just keep repeating this. If they're able to access an income in retirement, that not all of it needs to go away, we can strategize that, prioritize that. Some people are like, I will never pay off my mortgage ever. And, that's great. That's their philosophy there. That's their belief. I believe the less debt you have in retirement, the less demand you have on the income that you need, but you've got to learn to manage it. So, I just work with them and show them opportunities. And maybe there's somebody who, depending on that situation, better to look at a semi-retirement instead of a full retirement for a few years to kind of edge in. Maybe they're eligible for a pension and it's advantageous to take that and then go get another job for 4 or 5 years to get that paid off. There's a whole lot of things that can work around. I don't believe that anybody should feel stuck in their situation. I can understand why they feel stuck. And it's time to get somebody from the outside looking in to help you see the other options that are available, because there's always options.
Awesome. And I believe that too. Now, as I'm getting older, and it's so funny because I know my mom is going to listen to this and she's like, she's going to be like, because there's so much that I didn't understand when I was younger. And she's like, oh, keep living. You'll get it. And I'm like, whatever. And I'm like, Mom, I get it. I understand.
Yep.
But if you could, right, because a lot of what I'm picking up on is that it takes discipline, it takes practice, it takes education, but it also takes a shift in your mindset and a shift in your perspective. And so what would you say is one mindset shift or practice that you have used throughout your journey to really transform your relationship with money the most?
Yeah, luckily I probably did it younger, right? Like it's not an idol to me. It's going to get me into the places I want to get into. That money serves me the way I want it to serve me. Like it becomes a tool. Instead of, the other way I like to phrase that is money controlling you, or are you controlling your money? Mm-hmm. And, getting in that opposite side of it is really important. And there's things we do reasons we do certain things over and over and over again. Sometimes it has nothing to do with money at all. I was working with a client and we dug in deeper to what was making her feel like she just needed to hoard this money. She was not even an overspender. It wasn't that, but she wasn't finding joy with her money, which I think is important as well. And discovered that her parents were entrepreneurs. They lost a lot, struggling as business owners, which is very true. But then also there was a fire when she was a younger teenager and they lost everything. So these are true fears. So then you have to take that perspective for like hers, like, well, then what is going to make you feel safe? What is going to make you feel safe so that you can give up this chunk of money to have it go serve you somewhere else? Because just hoarding it in a bank account is not healthy. So really, money needs to bring you joy. Money needs to help you feel all of the things that you need to feel.
Beautiful.
Peace. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes. Peace, safety, and joy, which brings me to my next question.
Oh, yay.
That. So, what would you say, how does pleasure tie into financial security? And do you think that being able to develop financial stability helps people to feel more free to not only save and do the things that they should do, but also have some wiggle room to enjoy their life?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm building a new program. It's like baby infants, and it's going to focus on savings. And I believe that savings helps you feel free. Now, saving is hard because you can't just go buy what you want. And if you've been working in that, that's a stress itself, right? It's like, oh, I really want that, or I need that, or I have to buy that. Then all of the thoughts going in your head, the decisions going in your head. Well, if you're saving, you've already taken out a lot of those decisions. So then you get the pleasure of, oh my gosh, look how much money we have. I'm covering all of these obligations, but we have this extra money. We were going to go here, but that's not going to work out because of, who knows, timeline, whatever it is, can't get off work. So let us do something more with that. So being able to create a flow of your money, so through budgeting and saving, gives you the freedom to pivot. So you have all these bills you have to pay. You have this spending you have to do, fuel, groceries, those types of things. There's just those have to happen or we don't exist. But it's the other where you start building up that stability. And then once you get there, it's covering things. Then you're like, oh my gosh, I have this extra. I get to feel free. I get to choose. Or if something bad happens that you never even saw coming, because that can, and it's, this huge amount of money, you might already have it. Even though it's a horrible situation, you can still feel freedom with your money. The other thing is if you've set up that flow, even though using that money, it's still not a strain. It's still not a struggle. It's still freeing because that money's going to keep filling that back up. And so getting to that spot where it's like, okay, we had to pay, like my husband, he's just gone through all of the baseline tests because we moved to a new place. We met our deductible, and I'm like, holy cow, we have the money, but it's a lot of money. High deductibles are high deductibles for a reason. And so I'm like, okay, we have the money, but on the other flip side, I have the money that's going back in there every single month, and we'll get back there. So even though it's not fun, I don't love to spend my money on things I don't want to spend my money on. Everybody's like that, right? But there's that other money that gives you the freedom, that gives you the joy, that if you do find a situation where you need to support somebody in whatever way it is, whether it's your child, a coworker, a good friend, a mom or a dad, monetarily, think how freeing that is to be able to say, I can give you this and I don't have to second guess that, or I can do this for you. I can, it's just the pleasure of being able to serve others is huge.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It really is. And so when you look back on your journey, what would you say is maybe the biggest lesson you've learned about how money and pleasure and personal fulfillment are all connected?
Yeah. realizing, so exactly like you said, we're young, we know everything, our parents know nothing. And as we start navigating the world on our own, it's like we get to build our own stories. And so, yeah, going back, I realize, I mean, things worked out for me, but I still wish I could go back and fix a few things. So going back and just being aware that, because hindsight's 2020, that you're going to get there. You can have more joy. I'm more of a saver than a spender. So I'm really tight, and I should be able to find more pleasure and more joy along the way. I do, but yet maybe not enough. And so learning to find that balance, and it's going to take a lot of refinement. It's going to probably ebb and flow with your life, with your level of income, with level of expenses, whatever you've got going on. But learn to enjoy those little things. Learn to enjoy your money. Learn to maybe splurge once in a while. And I use that word loosely, like splurge to not cause damage to your financial situation, right? If you're saving and got that flow, you've got that freedom, you get to take that, you get to go splurge. Don't be like me and think, why am I going to spend it on that? And then you never do, and you're just doing the same thing. So really enjoy, but not overindulge.
I like that a lot. And so there's been so much shared, and I'm trying to figure out exactly, which piece I would like to take and move into, I guess, the pleasure principle portion of the show. And that's when I ask like the two questions that I ask to every single guest. So the way that I'll phrase the first question is, now that you have retired and you are actively, you're exploring things, you're starting to get back into hobbies, you are actively designing a life that you love and a life that brings you joy and pleasure. What does that pleasure feel like for you?
Oh, yeah. Just the flow, the ease of it, right? It's just kind of goes, sometimes it can be mundane. And that's where I realize, okay, you're feeling a little mundane. It's time to create something more, create something different. And I think that's where the pleasure piece comes in, right? You've got to keep enjoying and pleasuring along the way in different ways. And so really, like, I loved how you said actively designing it, because it is, it's like you have this perception of what retired people do. It's not what I do, but I love the fact that I don't have to go to work every day. Even though I do run my financial coaching business, it's my choice and it's how I get to actually design it. But then it's like those other hours, what am I doing? What are we creating? My husband and I, we typically go on day dates now. We don't have to do the weekends. We don't have to do the nights, and so finding the pleasure in the whole different schedule is probably the biggest pleasure I have found in retirement.
That's beautiful. And so with that being said, what would you say is your non-negotiable pleasure principle?
I am not going to disrupt the routine that I already have. So I'm still refining it, but I still have it. It's really hard to want to do anything outside of the house before 8 a.m. Now I can, but my principle is like, no, there's this frame of time where I'd rather fall those have-tos in as opposed to my time, my pleasure time, my enjoy time.
That's beautiful. I love that so much, because as you were speaking on it, I just felt this sense of like calm and, just being really grounded in your decision. And I think that's something that's really, really important, because especially when it comes to money, because a lot of decisions that people make with money are emotion-based decisions, and they're not really grounded. They're not grounded in fact a lot of time. And they're not grounded in peace. Those decisions aren't made from a more stable emotional state. And so I really appreciate you speaking on that. And so for the listeners out there who have been inspired by your story, or they want to get to know more about you, or maybe even become a client, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can go to my website, elevatefinances.us. And right on there, there's a link to book a call. Book a call, let's chat. You'll know me a little bit. Also poke around on my website. It tells about what programs I have, but I take everybody through a strategy intensive first. It's just a 2-hour, I say it's just a 2-hour. It's a 2-hour intensive. We look at your money. We actually kind of create a plan. And from that, you can either go out on your own if you're somebody that's like, I just needed that framework, or if you're like, no, I need the accountability. I need to learn some more things. I know I'm struggling with, like mindset, or I need to create that debt and stick with it. Then there's the 3-month coaching at that. But yeah, go elevatefinances.us at book a call. I'd just love to chat.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'll make sure to have all your information in the show notes and like up on the site and everywhere that the episode is going to be. And I thank you so much for your time today. This was a really enlightening conversation for me, especially. And I know that if I got something out of it, then the listeners and the watchers did as well. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this week's episode of the Power of Pleasure podcast. Make sure to check the website, powerofpleasurepodcast.substack.com. On the site, not only will you find some blog posts and other helpful tools to help you continue the mission, you'll also be able to access the show notes as well as any social links and resources from this week's guest. While you're at it, if you found this information valuable, which I'm sure you did in some way, go ahead and take a few moments to leave a rating or review wherever you're listening to this episode and share out on social. I hope to see you next week for another episode of the show. And in the meantime, in between time, go out and do one thing today to help you embrace pleasure as a lifestyle.